What if the greatest mysteries of our world lie not in the stars above, but in the crushing darkness beneath, within the very heart of our own planet? For centuries, humanity has gazed upon the ocean's vast, unknowable expanse, dreaming of sunken cities and creatures of myth. But what if those dreams were not our own? What if a realm beyond our comprehension dreams back? This is a story whispered in the shadows of American history, far from academia's polished halls, yet meticulously documented in forgotten ledgers and faded photographs. A chilling terrestrial inheritance that has plagued a single family line for generations, anchoring them to a desolate stretch of coastline where a weathered lighthouse stands sentinel. Its salt-blasted stone and groaning timber echo maritime disasters and unspoken pacts. Here, the air hangs heavy with brine and decay, a stillness broken only by the Atlantic's relentless roar, whispering of history refusing to remain submerged. This is the tale of the Morelands, a family bound by an accursed legacy, tied directly to the first deep-sea expeditions into the Puerto Rico Trench, a chasm so profound, so alien, it dwarfs the highest peaks. For generations, an insidious secret has festered within that abyssal darkness, dormant, patiently waiting. Now, it stirs, resurfacing with a terrifying hunger. It demands a blood price, not just for a long-buried past, but for their lineage's very future. Their affliction manifests as creeping, hereditary somnambulism, vivid and terrifying oceanic nightmares that claw at their sanity, and an undeniable, almost magnetic pull towards the deepest, most treacherous waters. This burden traces back to their ancestor, a disgraced cartographer who vanished during the infamous 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition. He left behind only cryptic charts, fragments of an unknown language, and a family line forever bound to something monstrous. The catalyst for their desperate struggle has arrived. Elias Moreland's younger sister, Lena, has succumbed entirely to the family's curse. Her somnambulistic episodes intensify, marked by chilling physical transformations and frantic attempts to return to the sea, uttering fragmented, guttural words. This terrifying regression forces Elias to finally unearth the meticulously suppressed family archives, seeking external help from marine archaeologists and researchers to understand the unthinkable. He has begun documenting their unraveling nightmare. The Morelands' struggle is a desperate, intimate fight for survival and redemption. They must understand and sever an ancient, primordial bond with something that lurks in the very heart of the Puerto Rico Trench before their lineage is consumed, transformed into unwilling vessels for an intelligence that predates humanity, destined to usher in an oceanic reckoning. What primeval force could forge such an enduring, terrifying bond with a human bloodline? And what chilling truth awaits us in the crushing, lightless void of the Puerto Rico Trench? Are you ready to join us on this journey into the unknown depths? Stay with us as Elias Moreland wrestled with the suffocating weight of his family's terrifying legacy. His desperate search for answers led him far beyond the realm of ancestral folklore and into the rigorous, often unforgiving world of modern science. He needed more than sympathy. He needed an explanation, a rational framework to confront the inexplicable. His plea, initially dismissed by countless academics, eventually found a reluctant ear in Dr. Aristorn. Dr. Aristorn, a distinguished marine geophysicist, hailing from the esteemed Scripps Institution of Oceanography, embodied the very spirit of scientific pragmatism. His career was built upon meticulously charting the ocean floor, unraveling geological mysteries, and perhaps more famously, discrediting sensational claims of cryptozoological sightings and uncharted Atlantises. Thorne was a man of data, of sonar scans, of seismic profiles. He believed in the tangible, the verifiable, the observable. The very notion of an accursed inheritance or ancient bonds ran counter to every principle he held dear. He viewed such concepts as the realm of fiction, not serious inquiry. When Elias first contacted him, detailing fragmented nightmares, hereditary somnambulism, and a sister speaking in an unknown tongue, Thorne's initial reaction was one of polite but firm skepticism. He attributed Lena's symptoms to a stress-induced psychosis, the family's history to an overactive imagination fueled by maritime tragedy. His vast experience had taught him that the human mind, under pressure, could weave the most elaborate tapestries of delusion. He was a scientist, not an exorcist, and certainly not an heir to some spectral generational drama. Yet a singular detail in Elias's frantic messages snagged Thorne's analytical mind. Elias spoke not just of curses, but of his ancestor, a disgraced cartographer from the infamous 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition. He mentioned fragmented charts, archaic bathymetric data, and notes on unusual geological formations within the Puerto Rico Trench. This was no longer mere folklore. This was historical data, however obscure, tied to one of the most enigmatic early deep-sea explorations. The Puerto Rico Trench itself, a titanic chasm plunging deeper than Mount Everest is tall, remained one of Earth's most formidable and least understood frontiers. The prospect of unearthed, forgotten survey data, even if embedded within a fantastical narrative, held a professional allure. Thorne agreed to consult, not out of belief in the Moreland curse, but out of a detached, academic curiosity for the historical expedition logs and any potential anomalies they might hint at. His approach was clinical, driven by a desire to find a logical, scientific explanation for the Morelands' plight, or, more likely, to politely debunk their claims. He sought patterns in the historical charts, looking for misreadings, optical illusions, or natural geological phenomena that might have been misinterpreted by 19th-century explorers lacking modern instrumentation. His method was to strip away the emotional veneer, to dissect the narrative into cold, hard facts, and to analyze them through the lens of established oceanographic and geological principles. He began his work with a detached confidence, ready to apply the full weight of his scientific expertise to unravel what he presumed would be nothing more than a tragic, elaborate misunderstanding. Little did he know, the depths he was about to probe were far more profound than any ocean trench. Dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world. The chilling decline of Lena Moreland was more than a medical anomaly. It was a desperate summons from the abyssal past. Her guttural whispers, incomprehensible to human ears, echoed a language not spoken on the surface world. A language Elias instinctively knew was tied to their family's cursed legacy. It was this agonizing unraveling that finally propelled him into the shadowed archives of the Moreland estate. A dusty sanctuary of forgotten truths and unspeakable terrors. Among the brittle, sea-stained documents, one particular ledger, bound in salt-eaten leather, demanded his attention. Its title, barely legible, read, Log of the Deepwater Revelation Expedition, 1873. This was it, the genesis, the infamous voyage that had forever tethered the Moreland lineage to the unfathomable darkness of the Puerto Rico Trench. It was an expedition born of an era gripped by scientific hubris and a thirst for the unknown, charting waters barely glimpsed by mankind. The official records spoke of it as a noble failure, a daring but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to map the deepest reaches of the Atlantic. But the Moreland Ledger told a different story. Within its pages, the ancestor, Horatio Moreland, emerged from the forgotten past, a brilliant, albeit eccentric, cartographer. Horatio had been the primary navigator on the Deepwater Revelation. His notes, scrawled in a frantic hand, detailed not just depths and currents, but increasingly strange acoustic signatures, inexplicable light phenomena, and pressure readings that defied all known oceanographic principles. He described a creeping sense of being watched, an intelligent presence in the crushing blackness. What was it that Horatio truly encountered down there? What unseen terror began to etch itself not just onto his charts, but into the very DNA of his descendants? The expedition plunged into the very heart of the Puerto Rico Trench, a scar on the ocean floor, more profound than any mountain range. As their modified submersible descended further than any vessel before it, Horatio's entries grew more obsessive. He began to sketch bizarre, non-Euclidean geometries, shapes that seemed to shift and reform on the page, accompanied by annotations in a cryptic cipher. Then, abruptly, the entries ceased. Horatio Moreland vanished without a trace, his disappearance officially attributed to equipment failure and the crushing pressures of the abyss. But the ledger remained, salvaged from a debris field, carrying a secret far more insidious than simple mechanical failure. It hinted at a conscious choice, a terrible bargain struck, or perhaps a terrifying absorption. What if Horatio didn't just vanish? What if he crossed a threshold, a boundary between realms, and in doing so, opened a door that can never be closed? Are you ready to uncover the secrets of the deep? Secrets woven into the fabric of time and lineage? Because the strange marks on Horatio's final, unfinished chart are not merely lines of latitude and longitude. They are a map to something far older, far hungrier. The oceanic adventure is just beginning. What did those cryptic charts truly reveal, and why did they become the accursed inheritance of the Moreland family? The air within the lighthouse, usually a sanctuary against the raging Atlantic, had become thick with a different kind of storm. It brewed within the very walls, emanating from the accelerating decline of Lena Moreland. Her somnambulistic episodes, once fleeting and unsettling, now consumed her nights, dragging her from the warmth of her bed towards the unforgiving roar of the waves. Elias would often find her by the seawall, her eyes wide and unseeing, a strange, guttural language escaping her lips, sounds that seemed to predate human speech, echoing primordial depths. What ancient tongue was she speaking? What monstrous entity was she calling to? Her body, too, began to betray unsettling changes. Her skin, once fair, sometimes took on a faintly phosphorescent sheen, a chilling luminescence that hinted at creatures of the deep abyss. Her fingertips, at times, would elongate subtly, her nails darkening and thickening, as if adapting to an aquatic existence. These weren't the fleeting symptoms of a shared nightmare, but tangible, terrifying transformations, visible manifestations of an unseen force tugging her towards a fate far worse than death. The medical professionals Elias consulted offered only bewildered gazes and clinical terms that utterly failed to capture the horror unfolding before his eyes. There was no diagnosis for a soul yearning for the crushing pressure of the abyssal plain. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his bones, a dread born not just of fear for his sister, but of the dawning realization that this was no ordinary illness. This was a hereditary shadow, a price being exacted across generations. He knew, with an instinct as old as the sea itself, that the answers lay not in modern medicine, but in the forgotten corners of their own bloodline. The curse demanded a deeper understanding, a journey into a past his family had painstakingly tried to bury. He remembered the hushed tones, the averted gazes, whenever the subject of their ancestor, the disgraced cartographer, arose. The name of the Deepwater Revelation expedition was spoken only in whispers, a grim legend of a voyage into the unknown that had irrevocably altered their family's destiny. Driven by a desperate hope to save Lena, Elias began the agonizing task of unearthing the meticulously suppressed family archives. Dust motes danced in the sparse light filtering through the lighthouse windows as he unlocked forgotten chests and unrolled brittle scrolls. The musty scent of ancient paper filled the air, each document a whisper from a bygone era, holding secrets too terrible to speak aloud. His fingers traced over faded ink, cryptic nautical charts that seemed to depict impossible topographies, and a tattered, water-stained journal. The entries in that journal, penned by his vanished ancestor, hinted at discoveries far beyond human comprehension, at an ancient bond reawakened and a blood price demanded. What truths did these forbidden texts hold? What unspeakable pact had been forged in the crushing darkness of the deep? Are you ready to dive deeper into this forgotten legacy? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal— Lena's cries muffled through the thick stone walls were a siren call to a past he had long suppressed, a past now demanding its due. He knew with a chilling certainty that the answers lay not in modern science alone, but in the dust-laden chronicles of his own lineage. The family archives, a forbidden vault of secrets, beckoned. Within a concealed study, behind a rotating bookcase, lay generations of silence. Salt-blasted logs, brittle charts, and leather-bound journals filled shelves, each a relic of an age when the ocean was still a vast, unknown frontier. The air itself felt heavy with the scent of aged paper and the phantom spray of forgotten voyages. Elias found them, the meticulous, yet increasingly deranged, records of Captain Alastair Morland, his great-great-grandfather, the disgraced cartographer. Alastair Morland was no mere mapmaker. He was an explorer possessed, a visionary whose ambition in 1873 led him aboard the ill-fated Deepwater Revelation expedition. Publicly hailed as a scientific endeavor to chart the nascent understanding of the Puerto Rico Trench, Alastair's personal logbook, discovered by Elias in a hidden compartment of an iron-bound chest, revealed a far darker, more audacious quest. The brittle pages, filled with cramped, fading script, whispered of a voyage into an abyss not just geographical, but existential. Among the precise bathymetric readings and nautical calculations, Elias found increasingly bizarre annotations. There were chilling, hurried sketches, impossible, fractal geometries that seemed to shift as he gazed upon them, bioluminescent patterns that defied known marine biology, and most disturbingly, repetitive, almost hypnotic symbols etched beside coordinates that plunged thousands of meters deeper than any human could have then reached. These were not the detached observations of a scientist. They were the desperate scrawlings of a mind caught in the undertow of something unimaginable. A horrifying, almost symphonic correlation began to resonate within Elias. The guttural, unknown syllables Lena uttered in her sleep, those chilling sounds that clawed at the fabric of his sanity, found a ghastly echo in Alistair's later entries. The logbook descended into obsession, documenting Alistair's growing conviction that a profound ancient intelligence stirred within the trench. He spoke of a call, a resonant frequency emanating from the abyssal plains, a sound that warped perception and birthed visions of structures not sculpted by terrestrial hands. The lost city, once a phantom whisper, solidified into a terrifying possibility. Then a final fragment, a half-torn page, brittle and stained, detailed not a discovery, but a pact, an agreement made in desperation to quiet the overwhelming call, to secure the fragile lives of his dwindling crew. But at what unconscionable price? What unspeakable bargain was forged in the absolute darkness of 1873? And what terrifying debt, after more than a century of insidious dormancy, is now awakening, demanding its blood price from the moorland line? The historical discovery was not an answer, but a reawakening of an ancient terror. The whispers from the depths had grown louder, more insistent, transforming from phantom echoes to a chilling, undeniable presence within the very walls of the moorland home. Lena's somnambulism, once a disturbing but sporadic occurrence, had mutated into something profoundly unnatural. Her nocturnal wanderings were no longer confined to the house. She now gravitated with an eerie, unwavering resolve towards the crashing surf, her body twisting into contortions that defied human anatomy, her skin taking on an unearthly pallor. The guttural sounds she uttered, once incoherent, began to coalesce into fragmented, rhythmic utterances that Elias, in his desperation, began to transcribe, sensing an ancient, forgotten tongue. He had seen the terrifying glimmer in her eyes, a reflection not of his sister, but of something infinitely older, infinitely colder, peering through her very being. The family archives, long a forgotten tomb of fading ink and brittle parchment, became Elias's frantic sanctuary and his ultimate torment. Amidst the yellowed photographs of grim-faced ancestors and the dry, meticulous ledgers of forgotten mercantile ventures, he unearthed the journals of his great-great-grandfather, Alistair Morland, the disgraced cartographer of the 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition. The pages, many water-stained and warped, hummed with a palpable sense of obsession and dread. Alistair's early entries chronicled the expedition's scientific ambitions, the pioneering spirit of their descent into the then uncharted Puerto Rico Trench. But as the pages turned, a chilling transformation occurred. The precise cartographic notes gave way to increasingly frantic scribbles, strange, almost biological-looking diagrams, and raw, almost poetic descriptions of an impossible, non-Euclidean geometry glimpsed in the abyssal darkness. Alistair wrote of a subterranean light, of songs beneath the basalt, and of an unseen current that tugged at the very soul. One particular entry, dated just days before Alistair's disappearance, stood out like a beacon of madness. It described a profound, almost telepathic communion with the structures, not ruins, but structures, vast and organic, pulsed with an alien luminescence. He detailed an overwhelming compulsion to join the chorus, to return to the Genesis point. Accompanying this entry was a detailed, almost photographic sketch of an object. Not a creature, not a building, but a geometric anomaly, vast and intricate, pulsating with tendrils that seemed to writhe even on the page. And beneath it, scrawled in a hand that was barely recognizable as Alistair's, was a series of symbols strikingly similar to the fractured syllables Lena had been uttering in her trances. A cold dread seeped into Elias's bones. The connection was undeniable, terrifying. The very affliction Lena suffered, the magnetic pull towards the deepest waters, the chilling language, the terrifying visions, they were not mere genetic anomalies, but echoes of his ancestors' fatal encounter. What Alistair had discovered, or perhaps what had discovered him, was now reaching across generations, across a century and a half of silent waiting, demanding its due. The ancestral curse was not merely a metaphor. It was a living, breathing, hungry entity, and Lena was its chosen conduit. But how could a deep-sea expedition from the 19th century, vanished without a trace, leave behind such an insidious, intelligent, and generational plague? Was Alistair Morland merely a victim of the ocean's unforgiving nature? Or was he, as his cryptic journal suggested, the unwitting architect of a pact, a bridge to an intelligence so ancient, so utterly alien, that its very memory could infest a bloodline for generations? What unimaginable truth lies buried beneath the lightless fathoms of the Puerto Rico Trench? A truth so potent it could consume a family, mind and body, across the unforgiving currents of time. The weight of generations pressed down on Elias Morland as he finally broke the seal on the forgotten crate. Dust motes danced in the sparse light filtering through the attic window, illuminating journals bound in decaying leather, brittle charts, and strange, archaic instruments. This was not merely an act of historical curiosity. It was a desperate excavation into his own unraveling reality. The family's affliction, once dismissed as a hereditary neurosis, now screamed of something far more sinister given Lena's terrifying transformation. Elias began his descent into the suppressed past, seeking not just answers, but a weapon against the creeping darkness that threatened to consume them all. His initial forays into the archives were met with fragments of a story too bizarre to be true, yet too consistent to ignore. The name of Obadiah Morland. His disgraced ancestor reappeared like a phantom limb, haunting every yellowed page. Obadiah, the cartographer whose very existence had been scrubbed from official naval records, vanished during the ill-fated 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition. Publicly, it was deemed a tragedy, a hubris-laden attempt to chart the then unfathomable depths of the Puerto Rico Trench. But Obadiah's private notes painted a different, chilling picture. They spoke not of charting mere bathymetry, but of an encounter, an interaction. Obadiah's meticulous hand, surprisingly steady for a man presumed lost to the sea's wrath, described anomalies, pulsing lights from impossible depths, resonating frequencies that drove men to madness. And then, the sketches, impossible geometries, structures that defied terrestrial architecture, sprawling beneath the crushing weight of the abyssal plain. Were these the ravings of a man driven insane by isolation and pressure? Or was he witnessing something that our nascent scientific understanding simply could not process? The more Elias read, the more he recognized the terrifying parallels with his own family's symptoms. The somnambulism, the ocean nightmares, the magnetic pull toward the churning waters. Obadiah's journals chronicled the very first manifestations of this bizarre hereditary curse. This was no mere family secret. It was a contagion, a primal echo emanating from the very deep, reaching across generations. The concept seemed absurd, yet Lena's guttural utterances, her frantic attempts to return to the sea, lent an unbearable, visceral truth to Obadiah's increasingly frantic entries. What intelligence, what forgotten horror could have imprinted itself so deeply upon a man's psyche that it rewrote the very genetic code of his descendants? What did Obadiah find in the abyss that transformed his lineage into unwilling conduits for its return? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. Elias's journey into the abyss of his family's past had only just begun. The true nature of the deep water revelation was far from revealed, and the echoes of its secrets were only now beginning to resonate with a terrifying clarity. What did the depths truly awaken in 1873? The Moreland family archives, buried for generations beneath layers of dust and denial, proved to be far more than a mere collection of faded photographs and brittle letters. Elias, driven by Lena's worsening condition, meticulously sifted through documents that whispered of an unspeakable past. Among them, he discovered a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age, its script a spidery hand that Elias slowly recognized as that of his ill-fated ancestor, the disgraced cartographer from the 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition. The journal wasn't a dry scientific log. It was a descent into obsession, a chilling testament to a mind unraveling at the precipice of an impossible truth. Its entries, initially precise observations of abyssal topography, grew increasingly erratic, filled with sketches of impossible geometries and cryptic annotations about living stone and vibrations from the deep. The cartographer, whose name had been deliberately scrubbed from official records, seemed to have been charting more than just the ocean floor. He wrote of currents that defied known physics, of bioluminescent phenomena that pulsated with an unsettling intelligence, and most disturbingly, of structures not of this world, yet undeniably here. These were not geological formations. His frantic drawings depicted colossal, regular patterns emerging from the abyssal plain, patterns that suggested an architectural intent, a grand design utterly alien to humanity. Could this be the first glimpse of the lost city, shrouded in the very beginning of humanity's true deep-sea exploration? Yet, official records of the 1873 expedition spoke only of equipment failure, navigational errors, and a tragic loss of life. There was no mention of strange structures, no hint of a cartographer's descent into madness. Was this a deliberate omission? A cover-up designed to bury an inconvenient truth beneath fathoms of institutional silence? The discrepancy between the official narrative and the frantic scribblings in the journal created a chilling paradox. A void into which Elias now felt himself being inexorably drawn. The journal also contained a series of increasingly desperate pleas, not for rescue, but for understanding. The cartographer wrote of a song emanating from the depths, a low thrumming that began subtly, but grew to dominate his thoughts, intertwining with his dreams. He described an overwhelming compulsion, a pull, similar to what Lena and other Morelands now experienced. This was not just a mental affliction. He documented its insidious physical toll, a creeping pallor and an unnatural coldness that mirrored Lena's own terrifying symptoms, Was the curse not merely hereditary, but an echo, a psychic contagion passed down through generations, still resonating from that original encounter? The Moreland family, it seemed, was not just cursed by a secret, but actively haunted by an ancient presence. This journal, this testament from a forgotten ancestor, suggested that the deep ocean did not merely hold secrets, it held memories. And some memories, it now became terrifyingly clear, possessed a hunger that transcended time, a hunger that had been stirring, dormant, beneath the crushing weight of the Puerto Rico Trench for over a century, waiting for its blood price. The whispers from the abyss were growing louder. What would they demand next? Lena's regression continued, a terrifying descent into something alien. The somnambulistic episodes no longer confined themselves to the dead of night, bleeding into the twilight hours, casting a perpetual shadow over the moorland home. Her movements became fluid, almost aquatic, her limbs contorting in ways that defied human anatomy, a chilling mimicry of creatures that dwell in sunless abysses. But it was her voice, or what emerged from it, that truly ripped at the fabric of Elias's sanity. The fragmented words she uttered were not gibberish. They possessed a rhythm, a cadence, an unsettling consistency that suggested a language, yet one unlike any known to human philology. It was a symphony of clicks, guttural growls, and high-pitched keening, a soundscape born of unimaginable pressure and primordial darkness. Elias, ever the scholar, meticulously recorded these utterances, replaying them endlessly, seeking patterns, a Rosetta Stone in the lexicon of his sister's unraveling mind. The more he listened, the more a horrifying truth began to coalesce. This was not a human tongue, nor even an earthly one, but something echoing from an epoch before our very concept of language. His desperate search within the family archives yielded a chilling breakthrough. Among his disgraced ancestors' fragmented expedition logs from 1873, beyond the meticulously drawn, yet strangely distorted, bathymetric charts of the Puerto Rico Trench, lay a series of transcribed notes. Hastily scrawled, almost illegible, they documented sounds. Not whale songs, not geological tremors, but an acoustic signature unlike anything the expedition crew had ever encountered. The cartographer, his mind seemingly fractured by the isolation and the fathomless depths, described it as a chorus of the impossible, a song of the deep, meant only for those who listen with their very blood. One entry, dated weeks before the cartographer's disappearance, detailed a sudden, pervasive, psychic resonance that afflicted the entire crew, inducing vivid, shared nightmares of an ancient, submerged metropolis. The log spoke of a shared compulsion, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to call them deeper, beyond the limits of their vessels, into an echoing void where light itself was consumed. This wasn't just observation, it was a communion. This wasn't merely discovery, it was the first contact. And then, a transcribed sequence of what the ancestor called the whispers of the forgotten tongue. Elias's blood ran cold. He played Lena's recorded utterances next to the faded script. The patterns matched. The guttural tones, the unsettling cadences, they were identical. His ancestor, in the crucible of the abyssal dark, had been the first to document the language of whatever lay dormant beneath the Puerto Rico Trench. And now, Lena was speaking it, fluently, horrifyingly, becoming a living conduit. What unholy pact had been forged in the deep, and what dreadful message was the trench now trying to convey through his sister? As Elias delved into the faded ledgers and encrypted journals, a pattern began to emerge, chilling in its repetition. These were not mere maritime folklore, but meticulously documented observations hidden within scientific logs and naval reports dating back to the late 19th century, often dismissed as optical illusions or equipment malfunctions. Yet, their convergence around the precise coordinates of the Puerto Rico Trench was undeniable, a mosaic of the inexplicable taking shape before his eyes. He unearthed accounts of hydrographic surveys detecting colossal, non-biological resonant frequencies emanating from depths far exceeding anything known to harbor life. These were not the low thrum of geological shifts, nor the song of leviathans, but complex, structured emanations that seemed almost deliberate. What ancient mechanism could generate such power from the very fabric of the abyss? Then came the visual anomalies. Old whaling charts, annotated by navigators of uncanny precision, occasionally depicted areas within the trench's vicinity marked with odd, pulsing lights, described as subterranean bioluminescence or cold fire by men who had witnessed countless deep-sea phenomena. These lights appeared not as sporadic flashes, but with a rhythmic regularity, as if signaling. Decades later, during early sonar tests, naval vessels reported inexplicable thermal signatures that would vanish as quickly as they appeared, leaving behind only the cold, crushing silence of the ocean floor. Scientists struggled to reconcile these fleeting apparitions with any known natural process, ultimately shelving them as data errors, ghosts in the machine. But Avias saw haunting consistency. He cross-referenced these forgotten reports with the Moreland family chronicles. A stark, unsettling correlation surfaced. Periods of heightened oceanic anomaly, the resonant frequencies, the phantom lights, the thermal spikes, often coincided with the most acute episodes of the Moreland somnambulism, with Lena's ancestors experiencing intensified nightmares and an almost unbearable magnetic pull towards the very waters where these phenomena were recorded. It was as if the trench itself was a vast, slumbering entity, occasionally stirring, and each tremor sent an echo through the cursed bloodline. The idea was absurd, unscientific, yet the evidence, fragmented as it was, whispered of a truth far more terrifying than any myth. The marine archaeologists Elias consulted, initially skeptical, found themselves increasingly disturbed by the sheer volume and precise geographic targeting of these anomalies. They spoke of geological impossibility, of physics defied. They theorized about unknown tectonic activity, unique chemosynthetic ecosystems, or even undiscovered deep-sea volcanoes. But none of their explanations fully accounted for the deliberate, almost intelligent nature of the patterns Elias had meticulously uncovered. The trench was not just a geological feature, it was a stage for something else. What force, hidden beneath miles of crushing water, could exert such a subtle yet profound influence across centuries, reaching even into the waking minds of a single family? The questions mounted, each more unsettling than the last, pulling us deeper into the abyssal enigma. Are you ready to join us on this journey into the unknown depths? The faded ink of the ancestors' suppressed journal, unearthed from the deepest recesses of the Moreland archive, did not merely fill the gaps in the official 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition logs. It ripped them open, revealing a chasm of deception and a terrifying truth. What the world understood as a pioneering scientific venture, a grand mapping of the burgeoning abyssal frontier, was, in the harrowing reality documented by Elias Moreland's disgraced progenitor, something far more sinister. The cartographer, a man known only by his initials, J.M., was not simply charting depths. He was searching. He was listening. The official records speak of hydrographic surveys, of groundbreaking pressure resistance tests, and the awe-inspiring descent of the Challenger's newfangled dredges. But J.M.'s private entries whisper of a different agenda, a directive from shadowy patrons, not of science, but of an esoteric pursuit. His meticulously drawn charts, once dismissed as erratic and riddled with non-existent anomalies, now revealed a hidden pattern. They were not just maps of the trench, but cryptic blueprints for interaction, overlaid with symbols that Elias, with his newfound knowledge of forgotten maritime cults and archaic navigational lore, recognized with a jolt of ice in his veins. These were not symbols of discovery, but of invocation. The paradox was agonizing. How could an expedition, heralded as a triumph of Victorian ingenuity, harbor such a dark, hidden core? J.M. wrote of signals received, not through telegraphs or soundings, but through a profound, almost telepathic resonance felt by specific individuals aboard the vessel. Individuals, he hinted, from specific bloodlines. He described peculiar, fleeting distortions in the water itself, luminescent phenomena that defied biological explanation, and an unnerving, low-frequency hum that permeated the ship's hull, felt more in the bones than heard by the ear. This was not the sea's natural song. It was a deliberate frequency, a call, and J.M.'s journal provided chilling, meticulous detail about attempts to answer it. He wrote of crude, experimental resonators lowered into the abyss, not to sample flora or fauna, but to amplify this primordial hum, to open a dialogue with whatever generated it. The expedition's true, unspoken goal, it now became terrifyingly clear, was not to observe, but to communicate. And the moorland ancestor, J.M., was not merely a cartographer, but a reluctant, perhaps even unwitting conduit. His disgrace was not a matter of incompetence, but of a profound, shattering encounter that led him to suppress the truth, to bury the evidence of what he had inadvertently awakened. But what was it that they sought to communicate with? And why, after decades of silence, did it now demand such a visceral, horrifying reawakening within the moorland lineage? The whispers had always been there, a low hum beneath the surface of the moorland home, dismissed as the creaking of old timber, the sigh of the restless ocean. But then Lena's episodes began to sharpen, to take on a terrifying clarity. No longer just a disturbed sleepwalker, she became a conduit, a living manifestation of the abyss's hunger. The somnambulism, once a chilling anomaly, morphed into something truly monstrous. A nightly possession dragging her closer to the precipice of humanity. Elias had documented the subtle changes first, an unnatural pallor beneath her skin, her eyes, even in sleep, possessing a phosphorescent glow, reflecting an unseen, unfathomable light from depths unknown. But it was the sounds that truly shattered their fragile peace. Low, guttural rumblings would emanate from her throat, a language not of human origin, yet laden with an undeniable archaic meaning. These were not the babblings of a fevered mind, but coherent, albeit alien, pronouncements vibrating with geological age, as if the very strata of the earth were speaking through her. What primordial echoes were escaping her lips, shattering the quiet of the night, demanding recognition from the dark. The urge to return to the sea became an insatiable craving. Lena, in her trance-like state, would bypass locked doors, seemingly phase through barriers with unsettling grace, drawn with unwavering magnetism to the crashing waves beyond the lighthouse bluff. More than once, Elias found her on the jagged rocks, the cold spray of the Atlantic lashing at her, her body unnervingly impervious to the elements, her voice rising to a strange chant that seemed to quiet the very roar of the ocean itself. Her skin, in these moments, would take on an almost slick, pearlescent texture, like the scales of some immense, deep-sea creature, a terrifying transformation, hinting at a horrifying evolution. Her fingers would stretch, unnaturally elongated, the nails hardening into sharp, almost claw-like points. It was during one particularly violent episode that the true horror unfurled. Lena, propelled by an unseen ancient force, tore through the house, her strength superhuman. Her elongated fingers, strangely jointed, left deep gouges in the ancient wood of the doorframes, as if trying to carve her way back to the primordial ooze. Her breath, usually a soft sigh, now emerged as a rasping, wet exhalation, carrying the faint, metallic tang of deep ocean brine, a scent that clung to the air like a shroud. The family's inherited nightmares, once confined to the mind's darkest corners, were now manifesting in the physical world. Tearing at the fabric of their reality, they were witnessing firsthand the physical embodiment of the ancient pact, the terrible price for a forgotten lineage. This was no longer a curse, it was an infestation, an unraveling of the human form itself. What unspeakable intelligence was attempting to breach the veil, using Lena as its unwilling vessel? And how far would this terrible transformation go before the Moreland bloodline ceased to be human altogether? The answers, Elias knew, lay not just in forgotten archives, but in the terrifying, evolving reality of his sister's affliction. He had to delve deeper into the family's tainted past, because Lena's body was rapidly becoming a battleground for a future none of them could possibly comprehend. A future where humanity might be merely a prelude to something far more ancient. The silent desperation that had consumed Elias Moreland began to yield, not to answers, but to a terrifying proliferation of questions. As Lena's episodes grew more frequent, her body contorting in a grotesque mimicry of something not human, Elias plunged deeper into the forgotten legacy of his ancestors. The Moreland family archives, long sealed and dismissed as eccentric curiosities, now streamed with a hidden history. Dusty ledgers, crumbling nautical charts, and faded daguerreotypes became his grim companions, each holding a whisper of the truth. His focus narrowed to the 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition, the genesis of his family's curse. Conventional history recorded it as a tragic yet pioneering venture into the Puerto Rico Trench, marred by an inexplicable loss of life and equipment. But Elias, armed with Lena's guttural utterances and the unsettling sight of her skin taking on an unnatural pallor, began to see beyond the official accounts. He unearthed a series of personal journals, meticulously kept by his disgraced ancestor, Captain Alistair Moreland, the expedition's cartographer. These weren't mere logs, they were chronicles of a man's descent into obsession, punctuated by sketches of abyssal forms never before conceptualized by human eyes. Alistair's early entries spoke of a methodical, scientific endeavor, a pursuit of geological wonders. Then, subtly, The tone shifted. Mentions of unusual acoustic anomalies, profound pressure fluctuations beyond expected depths, and visions experienced by the crew during their deepest dives began to appear. These were dismissed by Alistair himself as pressure-induced delirium. Yet the specificity of his drawings, the intricate details of what he termed geometric bioluminescence, defied mere hallucination. One particular entry sent a chill through Elias, a hurried sketch of a structure, impossibly vast and angular, partially obscured by what Alistair described as living light. Was this the lost city whispered in the legends? What truly unsettled Elias was not just the content, but the missing pieces. Entire sections of Alistair's journals were excised, pages torn out with surgical precision. Official expedition reports from the National Archives, which Elias accessed through his academic connections, made no mention of such discoveries, nor of the strange illnesses that afflicted other crew members upon their return. Instead, the narrative focused on structural failures and navigational errors, painting Alistair as the culpable party, a man whose ambition had led to catastrophe. This stark contradiction, this deliberate erasure, ignited a fire of suspicion within Elias. Why would such profound findings, even if deemed fantastical, be utterly expunged from the record? What secrets were so dangerous they had to be buried not just in the trench, but in the annals of history itself? The Moreland family curse, therefore, wasn't just a hereditary affliction. It was a consequence, a living testament to a truth suppressed. Lena's fragmented words, Elias now suspected, were not gibberish, but echoes of the ancient tongue Alistair had encountered. Her physical changes, the uncanny draw to the sea, were perhaps the slow, agonizing process of reassimilation, a return to the primeval source. The deepwater revelation wasn't just about discovering new depths. It was about awakening something that remembered, something that had slumbered, waiting for its bond with the surface world to be inadvertently reestablished. The official narrative, a comforting shroud of scientific explanation, was unraveling before Elias's eyes, revealing a sinister tapestry woven from forgotten encounters and desperate cover-ups. He realized his ancestor hadn't just stumbled upon a mystery. He had disturbed a sleeping leviathan, and in doing so, condemned his descendants. What if the expedition hadn't simply failed, but had instead succeeded in a way no one could have comprehended, unleashing an intelligence so alien, so profound, that its very existence had to be purged from human consciousness? What if the greatest danger wasn't merely the depths themselves, but what those depths held captive, and what it now sought to reclaim? Now, the chilling implication began to solidify. Alistair Moreland, the disgraced cartographer, wasn't just a victim of the deep, but perhaps an unwilling, unwitting conduit. The family's inherited somnambulism, those terrifying oceanic nightmares, were they not merely symptoms of a curse, but perhaps a form of ancestral memory? A fragmented, terrifying stream of consciousness flowing from the abyss into the minds of his progeny. It was as if the trench itself, with its unfathomable pressure and perpetual darkness, had imprinted itself upon their very DNA, creating a living archive of an encounter too terrible to recall consciously. And Lena, in her terrifying regression, was merely the most recent, most vivid iteration of this genetic recall, speaking a language designed not for human understanding, but for the silent, crushing depths. The questions multiplied, each more unsettling than the last. Was the 1873 expedition a scientific endeavor gone wrong, or a forced spiritual communion? Did Alastair truly vanish, or was he absorbed, transformed, becoming one with the very entity he had charted? And if so, what fate awaited Lena, who now seemed to be accelerating towards that same horrifying transformation? The archives, rather than offering solace, offered only a deeper descent into a labyrinth of ancestral terror, each revelation pulling Elias further from the world he knew and closer to the abyssal truth that now pulsed within his sister's veins. The search for meaning in the forgotten logs and redacted reports was not merely an academic exercise for Elias. It was a desperate race against time. He was not just uncovering history, he was witnessing it repeat, with Lena as the focal point of its terrible reenactment. The scientific community had long since closed the book on the Deepwater revelation, attributing its failures to human error and technological limitations. But Elias knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the true revelation had nothing to do with depth soundings or oceanic currents. It was about something ancient stirring beneath the waves, an entity that had whispered to his ancestor and was now reaching for his sister. What was this primordial bond? And how could it be broken when its roots delved into the very bedrock of the planet, entwined with the essence of life itself? The somnambulistic episodes that plagued Lena intensified with a frightening regularity. Each descent into the abyssal trance, more profound, more unsettling than the last. Her movements, once halting and uncertain, now possessed a fluid, almost serpentine grace, utterly alien to human physiology. Elias, driven by an urgency that gnawed at his very soul, a desperate race against Lena's terrifying transformation, delved deeper into the forgotten moorland archives within the groaning timber of the old lighthouse. The air itself seemed to hum with unspoken history, heavy with the scent of brine and decay, mirroring the putrid current of their ancestral curse. Among the brittle, salt-stained ledgers, each page a testament to generations of suppressed fear. He unearthed a small, iron-bound box, its lock rusted shut, secured not by a key, but a crude, lead-sealed symbol he recognized from one of his ancestors' earliest, most cryptic nautical sketches. Inside, meticulously preserved by a layer of beeswax, lay not just the cryptic charts he'd already encountered, but a crude, yet undeniably detailed, hand-drawn diagram. It depicted a vast, impossible geometric structure, not of stone or metal as we understand it, but seemingly of congealed darkness, interwoven with light, unlike anything known to human architecture. This unholy edifice was nestled deep within a specific, anomalous depression of the Puerto Rico Trench, a site precisely where the 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition had reported inexplicable sonar interference and equipment malfunctions. It was an image of pure, primeval horror, rendered with meticulous, chilling precision. Dr. Eris Thorne, the marine archaeologist Elias had finally managed to engage, a man whose career was built on rigorous empiricism, initially dismissed the drawing as an elaborate flight of a fevered mind, a cartographer's delusion born of the crushing pressure of the deep, a desperate artist's attempt to interpret chaos. But then, Elias presented Thorne with a companion piece, an acoustic anomaly log, also from 1873, detailing a repetitive, low-frequency hum emanating consistently from those exact coordinates. It was a sound recorded for weeks, a monotonous, deep thrum, unlike any known geological or biological signature. Thorne's professional skepticism fractured, replaced by a chilling fascination that bordered on dread. The hum's pattern, when analyzed through modern spectral analysis, bore an uncanny resemblance to the rhythmic inflections Lena now uttered in her trance-like states. A guttural cadence that seemed to resonate from unimaginable depths, a primordial language vibrating with a purpose beyond human comprehension. Lena's physical transformations became more pronounced with each passing day. Her skin, once warm and vibrant, took on a pallor, almost translucent, with faint, iridescent patterns emerging beneath the surface, like the spectral bioluminescence of abyssal creatures. Her eyes, when she was in her trance, held a luminosity that was not human, an ancient, knowing light, fixed always on the distant horizon, as if gazing into an unseen abyss that called to her. The family's inherited pull to the deep was no longer a metaphor. It was a physical, terrifying compulsion, an insidious magnetic pull. Lena's every waking moment, and terrifyingly her every sleepwalking journey, was a pilgrimage towards the thundering Atlantic, towards that precise coordinates marked on the ancient chart, a silent, primordial summons from the trench itself. The question was no longer if something resided there, but what it truly desired, and what it was turning Lena into. Was the very language of the abyss emerging through Lena? A desperate plea, or a terrifying command from a city long forgotten, now awakening? The whispers in Lena's sleep had deepened into guttural pronouncements, words Elias could never decipher, yet their cadence echoed a primordial language that seemed to resonate from the very bedrock of the ocean floor. Her somnambulistic episodes no longer merely drew her towards the crashing surf. They transformed her. Her skin grew unnervingly cold. Her eyes, when open, held an ancient, unblinking depth, like windows into the abyssal void itself. It was no longer a trance. It was a horrifying possession, a direct conduit for something unspeakable. One storm-lashed night, the lighthouse groaned in unison with Lena's pained cries. Elias found her by the storm door, clawing at the timber, her fingers bent at unnatural angles, her voice an unholy chorus of clicks and whistles. A language defying human phonetics. Amidst the maelstrom, he witnessed the undeniable, a faint, bioluminescent glow emanating from her, pulsating like deep-sea organisms. It was a light from depths no sunbeam had touched, a sign the connection was not psychological, but profoundly, terrifyingly physical. This was the first contact, not with distant aliens, but with an intelligence forged in the crushing pressure and eternal darkness of our own world's deep. The Moreland family was not merely haunted. They were being actively assimilated, their biology morphing to accommodate a host that had waited for generations. Elias, documenting Lena's regression, confronted entries in his ancestors' journals that chilled him. The disgraced cartographer of the 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition hadn't simply vanished. He had encountered something that left an indelible mark on his lineage. He described similar, though less acute physical alterations within some of his crew, now undeniable and amplified in Lena, demanding, what if the expedition wasn't just about mapping, but about a terrifying reciprocation, an unintended opening of a doorway? What if the revelation was less about discovery and more about an ancient entity remembering its claim? The entity didn't just desire Lena's return. It craved her transformation, her ultimate absorption into its collective consciousness, an echo of a primordial pact made in the crushing silence of the abyss. This wasn't a curse. It was an inheritance, a terrifying communion with the unfathomable. Lena was becoming the bridge, the living proof of an ancient bond reawakened. Are you ready to truly grasp the chilling implications of such a connection? A bond forged in the deepest abysses of our planet? Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may redefine the very boundaries of life and sentience. The desperate plea for understanding echoed not just in Elias Moreland's ancestral home, but now across the scientific institutions he engaged. Marine archaeologists and oceanographers, initially skeptical of a family's folkloric burden, confronted Elias's meticulously compiled archives. Logs of impossible coordinates, sketches of alien geometries, and chillingly, the Moreland affliction mirroring oceanic cycles. What began as a sympathetic examination of a tragic lineage soon morphed into a grudging acceptance of a profound anomaly, beckoning their instruments towards the deepest chasm of the Atlantic. Their initial surveys of the Puerto Rico Trench, undertaken with advanced sonar and hydrophone arrays, yielded data that shattered conventional expectations. The abyssal plains, thought to be stable, pulsed with an unsettling rhythmic vibrational pattern. These weren't chaotic tectonic shifts, but a consistent, low-frequency hum, too uniform to be natural, too vast to be man-made. The very bedrock of the ocean floor seemed a resonating chamber for an ancient, subterranean thrum. Further investigation unveiled localized pockets of extreme thermal flux, unlinked to known hydrothermal vents, appearing and dissipating with an eerie, unpredictable cadence. Within these ephemeral zones, water samples revealed anomalous chemical compositions, isotopes of elements not typically found, and complex organic compounds whose molecular structures defied terrestrial classification. A nascent, alien chemistry seemed to brew in the trench. A primordial soup churned by an unseen hand. Even more disturbing were the biological shifts. Deep-sea cameras, peering into the eternal twilight, captured bioluminescent phenomena unlike anything catalogued. Not the gentle, flickering lights of gnome organisms, but vast, undulating patterns that pulsed with a deliberate, almost intelligent rhythm. Within these light shows, marine life, from copepod to abyssal fish, exhibited highly erratic behaviors. Mass migrations away from specific areas, or, conversely, inexplicable aggregations towards. Their movements, no longer instinctual, were driven by an unseen, undeniable compulsion. Was this the deep's awakening, or simply its reaction to something stirring below? What ancient chords resonated so profoundly with the Moreland bloodline, drawing them, body and mind, back to the precipice of the trench? The ocean, it seemed, was beginning to remember, and its memory manifested as a chilling, inescapable reality. Yet, as we sift through the dust-laden archives, piecing together the fractured history of humanity's earliest forays into the abyssal plains, a chilling pattern emerges. The official logs of the 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition, once considered barren of true insight beyond their scientific measurements, hold whispers of anomalies dismissed as instrument malfunctions or the hallucinatory effects of extreme pressure. But when viewed through the dark lens of the Moreland family's unfolding curse, these footnotes transform into horrifying premonitions, echoes of an unspeakable truth. Our most profound breakthrough came not from grand public records, but from the meticulously guarded, almost pathologically organized private collection of the moorland estate itself. Tucked away in a reinforced, salt-resistant trunk, concealed behind false panels in an old study, a leather-bound journal was found. Its pages, brittle with age and seawater damage, belonged to none other than Reginald Morland, the disgraced cartographer and Elias's ancestral key to this enduring nightmare. This was no mere logbook. It was a descent into a mind grappling with the unthinkable, a first-person account of the very genesis of the family's affliction. Reginald's script, often erratic and stained with what appeared to be dried seawater, detailed not only the coordinates of their deep-sea dives into the trench, but also the escalating strangeness aboard the expedition vessel. He spoke of a pervasive, almost biological hum that began to resonate through the ship's hull at maximum depth, a sound that seemed to bypass the ears and vibrate directly within the bones. Crew members, including Reginald himself, began to experience vivid, terrifying nightmares not of drowning, but of endless, sentient darkness, of structures far grander and more ancient than any known human edifice, illuminated by an alien phosphorescence. Crucially, Reginald's entries meticulously documented the onset of somnambulistic episodes among the crew, particularly after prolonged exposure to the trench's lowest reaches. He described fellow sailors rising from their bunks in a trance-like state, muttering fragmented words in a guttural language none could identify, driven by an irresistible subconscious urge to reach the ocean's surface and fling themselves back into the depths. Their eyes, he wrote, would take on a strange, milky luminescence, reflecting an inner world not their own. This was the nascent form of the Morland curse, captured in real time. His final entries grew increasingly frantic, marked by frantic sketches of impossible geometric forms and recurring symbols, forms he claimed to have glimpsed in the abyssal currents themselves. He wrote of a pervasive mental hunger, an insatiable pull towards a specific point in the trench, a location he later attempted to chart with obsessive precision, marked on his maps not with nautical soundings, but with a single unnerving symbol, a spiraling eye-like glyph that seemed to pulse with unseen energy. This symbol, disturbingly, bore a chilling resemblance to markings Elias had found, etched into the ancient lighthouse's foundation. Reginald's journal concluded abruptly, a final, half-finished sentence describing an overwhelming, beckoning void. He vanished shortly thereafter, leaving behind not just a coast lineage, but the very blueprint of their inescapable fate. The implications of Reginald Morland's first-hand account are staggering. It suggests the family's affliction is not a genetic predisposition to madness, but a direct, generational echo of an encounter, a bond forged in the deepest, darkest waters. Could the legendary creatures, rumored to inhabit the trench, be more than myth? Could they be sentient, ancient entities capable of imprinting their will, their very essence, upon those who dare to trespass? What did Reginald truly see? And what terrifying agreement, conscious or unconscious, did he make that bound his descendants to this primordial force? The oceanic adventure is just beginning. The whispers had grown to a roar. No longer confined to the torment of Lena's dreams, they now echoed through the very halls of the Morland home, a chilling chorus sung in a language that defied human phonetics, guttural and wet, like ancient stone ground by ceaseless tides. Elias, desperate, had sought the counsel of Dr. Eris Thorne, a renowned marine anthropologist from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, whose initial skepticism had curdled into a profound, unnerving disbelief. One moonless night, the phenomenon manifested with a horrifying clarity that shattered any lingering doubt of Lena's terrestrial affliction. Her somnambulism escalated from restless wandering to an almost preternatural urgency. She moved not with the clumsy gait of a sleepwalker, but with an eerie fluidity, her limbs seeming to contort and extend in ways unnatural for a human frame. Her skin, once pale, took on a strangely luminescent sheen under the dim light, and a faint, yet undeniable, briny odor began to emanate from her. A scent not merely of seawater, but of something deeper, more primordial, like the undisturbed sediments of an aeon. Dr. Thorne, a man accustomed to the cold logic of evidence, stood paralyzed as he witnessed Lena's transformation firsthand. Her eyes, usually of vibrant hazel, became milky and opaque, reflecting nothing but the void. From her throat, the guttural sounds intensified, shaping themselves into a rhythmic chant, a lament, or perhaps a summoning, a melody too ancient to have ever been composed by human hands. It was the sound of the deep, a language that seemed to vibrate the very molecular structure of the air around them. This was no mere hereditary illness. It was an echo from an unfathomable past, resonating through a living vessel. Lena's attempts to reach the sea became terrifyingly powerful. She would lunge with a strength Elias had never witnessed, tearing at the reinforced locks on the lighthouse door, her nails leaving deep gouges in the old timber, as if guided by an unseen current. Her breath, when she exhaled, was no longer human. It carried the chill of the abyssal plains, and small, almost imperceptible filaments, like iridescent algae, began to appear on her skin, clinging to her hair. The true horror, the bizarre discovery that ripped through their scientific understanding, occurred when Dr. Thorne attempted to record her vocalizations. Instead of a typical audio signature, his sensitive equipment registered an astonishingly complex waveform, a pattern eerily similar to biosonar signals emitted by deep-sea cetaceans, yet infinitely more intricate and layered, as if carrying information far beyond simple navigation. It was a communication, not just a sound, a direct connection to the very intelligence they had theorized. This was not merely Lena's body acting out a compulsion. It was becoming a conduit. The line between human and something else, something ancient and oceanic, was blurring with terrifying speed. What deep-sea leviathan could speak through human flesh, and what would it demand? The truth, when it finally began to reveal itself from the dust-laden pages of the Moorland archives, was not a simple answer, but a terrifying echo from the deep past. Elias, driven by Lena's increasingly alarming regression, unearthed a cache of his ancestors' personal effects. Long deemed too sensitive or too insane to be openly preserved. Among them was a final, meticulously coded journal, its cover worn smooth by the ocean's salt and time, detailing not just observations from the 1873 Deepwater Revelation expedition, but a chilling hypothesis. This was no mere cartographer's log. It was a descent into an obsession, a frantic attempt to quantify the unquantifiable. Within its fragile pages, amidst sketches of impossible geological formations and crystalline structures, lay a series of complex equations and diagrams. These were not charts of a lost city in the traditional sense, but of a living architecture, an organic crystalline matrix within the trench itself. Elias, consulting with specialists in quantum geology and bioacoustics, began to piece together his ancestors' horrifying conclusion. The lost city was not built, but grown. It was an extension, perhaps even the physical manifestation, of the very intelligence that had formed the ancient bond. The journal described a symbiotic relationship, a kind of deep-sea parasitism, where the Moreland lineage was not merely affected, but imprinted. The curse was a genetic resonance, a biological key to unlocking dormant pathways within the human genome, intended to facilitate a complete assimilation. Lena's guttural language, her physical transformations, were not signs of madness, but the terrifying beginnings of this intended metamorphosis. The language itself was not alien, but rather a primordial proto-dialect, a resonance from the dawn of oceanic life, designed to interface with the organic architecture of the trench. This was the deepest, most unsettling revelation yet. The Morelands were not just victims of a forgotten secret, but the chosen instruments of a vast, ancient design. Their ancestral somnambulism, the pull to the depths, was not a curse, but a homing beacon. What purpose could such an assimilation serve? What grand, unfathomable agenda lay behind this aeons-long cultivation of a human bloodline, destined for a transformation that defied every known law of biology and physics? The more Elias understood, the more the abyss seemed to gaze back, not with empty void, but with a horrifying, ancient intelligence. How could a family sever a bond that was written into their very DNA? A bond designed not for their destruction, but for their evolution into something utterly monstrous. The fragmented notes, meticulously catalogued by Elias, began to coalesce into a terrifying, coherent narrative. They spoke not merely of coordinates, but of cycles, of alignments astronomical and oceanic, marking precise moments when the veil between realms thinned. The ancestor, it seemed, was not simply a cartographer, but an unwilling participant in something far grander and more terrifying than mere exploration. His descent into the trench in 1873 was no accident of mapping. It was a compelled pilgrimage, a destiny finally reaching for Lena. The chilling implication began to surface. The curse was not merely a random affliction, but an echo, a deeply ingrained biological response to a primordial signal, a call emanating from the very core of the Earth's abyssal heart. Lena's guttural whispers, once dismissed as the delirious ramblings of a fevered mind, were now chillingly recognized as fragmented utterances of a language predating human tongue, a lexicon contained within the ancestors' deciphered charts. This was not madness, but an awakening, a reignition of an ancient connection. What if the disgrace of the 1873 expedition was a desperate, failed attempt to contain what they had unearthed, rather than a mere failure to chart unknown waters? What if the ancestor, in his final, terrifying moments, had not vanished, but transcended, becoming an unwilling conduit for the very entity he sought to document? A Moreland lineage, then, was not merely cursed. It was chosen, groomed across generations, each member a potential vessel, a living key forged for a purpose beyond human comprehension, linked to the unseen city below. The deeper Elias delved into the cryptic symbols as the lighthouse's beams swept the darkness, the more horrifying the truth revealed itself. These were not just navigational markers for a sunken metropolis. They were sigils of power, complex blueprints for a monumental energy transfer designed to funnel something unspeakably ancient from the abyssal darkness into our fragile world. Lena's escalating transformations, her skin growing unnaturally pallid, her eyes taking on an almost preternatural luminescence, were not just symptoms of her deterioration. They were the harrowing physical manifestations of this very transfer. A transformation into a living gateway, a bridge built of flesh and blood for an intelligence that hungered. Could the blood price be literal? Not a death, but a profound, grotesque metamorphosis, a sacrifice of humanity itself to bridge the chasm between worlds, to usher in a new epoch governed by the deep. The unsettling, cold question hung in the air. Was Lena becoming merely a vessel, or was something far more ancient and terrible stirring within her? An intelligence learning to wear human flesh, preparing for its ultimate, terrifying emergence. The final, horrifying pieces of the puzzle seemed to be falling into place, but the picture they formed was one of unutterable, cosmic dread. A future where humanity might become merely a footnote in an ancient, reawakened saga. The specialist, Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose life work had been charting the forgotten abyssal plains, laid out the ancient mariner's charts alongside modern bathymetric scans. His voice, usually academic and measured, now quivered with a raw, undeniable awe. What your ancestor, Elias, what he stumbled upon in 1873, was not merely a geographic anomaly. He didn't chart a lost city of stone. He mapped a consciousness, an intelligence. He pointed to a precise location within the trench, a segment previously dismissed as geological noise, an echo of seismic activity. These aren't fault lines. These are neural pathways, a vast organic network that extends far beyond the physical boundaries of the Puerto Rico Trench. The Deepwater revelation was no failed expedition. It was a communion, a binding. The charts, once seen as evidence of madness, now became a terrifying blueprint of an ancient pact. The symbols weren't navigational errors. They were sigils, markers of a symbiotic relationship, a parasitic attachment that had spanned generations. Elias's family wasn't cursed. They were hosts. The somnambulism, the nightmares, Lena's terrifying regression. These were not symptoms of illness, but the entity's increasing attempts to synchronize, to assert control, to pull them back to its primordial heart. The lost city, Dr. Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, is not a structure you can excavate. It's a collective mind, an oceanic consciousness that perceives time and space in ways we can barely comprehend. It hungers not for blood, but for consciousness, for a vessel, for a bridge back to the surface world it once knew. The implications were staggering. Was humanity simply a later, fleeting inhabitant of a world once dominated by an intelligence from the abyssal darkness? Lena, her eyes wide and unseeing, began to stir. A low, guttural hum emanated from her, a sound that seemed to vibrate from the deepest parts of the ocean. A lament and a beckoning. Her skin, previously pale, now shimmered with an almost iridescent quality, a faint, bioluminescent glow tracing the veins beneath her flesh. She was no longer just his sister. She was a threshold, a living conduit. The ancient bond was nearing its horrifying zenith. The final confrontation was not with a monster of fang and claw, but with an overwhelming, pervasive influence. Dr. Thorne, having spent years meticulously researching forgotten maritime lore and obscure deep-sea phenomena, believed the answer lay not in battle, but in severance. The original cartographer, your ancestor, he didn't just chart it, he sealed a fragment of himself to it, a tether. And that tether has been passed down strengthening with each generation, preparing a future vessel. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his bones. The price for breaking this ancient bond, for truly severing the connection, was not just understanding the horror, but performing an act of unimaginable will. He had to face the entity's raw psychic force, its eons of accumulated hunger. He had to sever the very thread of his lineage that connected them to this monstrous, beautiful, terrifying consciousness. He had to choose between his family's future and the complete irreversible loss of a part of their very identity. The ocean had remembered, and now it demanded its due. What was Elias willing to sacrifice to reclaim his family from the abyssal embrace? The harrowing crucible of the Puerto Rico Trench left Elias Morland a man irrevocably altered. He returned from the abyss, not victorious, but burdened with a terrifying clarity. Lena, too, emerged from her regression, her eyes now holding a glimmer of an ancient sea, her mind a fragile bridge between two worlds. The full transformation was averted, not through severance, but through a terrifying, tenuous understanding. The bond, the ancestral curse, remained. It was merely dormant, its hunger sated, for now, by a pact Elias instinctively forged in the very maw of the deep. They were not free, but they were no longer completely consumed. The Morlands now carried not just a burden, but a vigil. Their family home, the lighthouse, no longer feels like a prison, but a sentinel. Its light now illuminates not just the treacherous coast, but the unseen abyssal depths, a silent warning against the resurgence of something unimaginable. Elias, forever changed, dedicates his life to the whispered legends, poring over fragmented charts and the cryptic warnings left by generations of his ancestors. He became the reluctant keeper of a terrible knowledge, understanding that the ocean's memory is long and its vengeance patient. The struggle for his family is not over. It has merely entered a new, more profound phase, a perpetual dance on the edge of the unknown. The Morlands ordeal forces us to confront the very limits of our understanding. If a singular family can be so profoundly connected to an intelligence that predates humanity, a force slumbering in the deepest chasm of the Atlantic, what else lies hidden beneath the sunlit surface? What other ancient bonds stretch across the vast, unexplored abyssal plains, waiting for the precise moment to reawaken? The Puerto Rico Trench, once just a geological anomaly, now looms as a potent symbol of our cosmic insignificance. It reminds us that our maps of the world are incomplete, our science is limited, and our perception of reality tragically myopic. The stories of lost civilizations, of leviathans in the dark, of ancient intelligent forces are often dismissed as mere myth. But the Morland legacy, etched in blood and brine, whispers a different truth. It speaks of a forgotten chapter in Earth's history, a world beneath our world, where time moves differently and life evolves beyond our wildest nightmares. It forces us to ask, what if the legends are not fanciful tales, but fragmented echoes of a truth too vast and too terrifying for our conscious minds to fully comprehend? What if the true masters of this planet have always resided in the crushing darkness, patiently waiting for the surface world to forget or to succumb? The ocean's depths hold not just undiscovered species, but undiscovered realities. The Morland story is a chilling invitation to peer into that darkness, to confront the uncomfortable truth that we are merely guests on a planet harboring secrets far older and far more powerful than ourselves. Are you ready to continue this journey into the unknown depths, to push the boundaries of what you believe is possible. Dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world on the Unspoken Sea channel, where every shadow holds a story and every ripple a revelation. Stay with us, because what we have begun to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. The search for truth never ends, and ours is just beginning.